the metallic clink of restraints, a whip's sharp whistle cutting through air. Then, nothing but stillness. Beneath the scorching Texas heat, a young woman's bare feet pressed against timber. Iron bands squeezed her wrists. Faces in the crowd studied her with the detachment of someone appraising cattle at market. The auctioneer's teeth gleamed as moisture trickled down his temple. 4 years had passed since the war outlawed bondage. Yet these clandestine transactions persisted in forgotten places, where individuals were bartered like outstanding debts to evade authorities. Next up, 17 years, unattached, no family to speak of, already passed through 3 owners, silent, uncooperative, opening bid, $5. In an era when labor value hinged on physical capability, a withdrawn girl seemed worthless, too damaged by recent hardship to command more than loose change. Nobody raised a hand. A seated man discharged saliva into the dirt. "Not worth my breath," his expression said. Her name was Lena Cartwright. Her clothing hung in tatters. Earth coated every inch of her exposed skin. Matted hair concealed the bruises marking her face. Her gaze fixed downward, motionless. Weeping had lost its purpose years ago. Tears accomplished nothing here. Then, a voice emerged. Unhurried, rich, unwavering. $30. Dozens of heads pivoted backward. Standing alone stood a weathered man in a faded tan jacket, crinkled currency clutched in his grip. Grant McCade, 56 winters behind him, ashen whiskers dotting his jaw, a face that appeared incapable of joy. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose sharply. 30, you're certain? Grant offered a single decisive nod. Wood cracked as the gavel descended. Completed. Lena's body remained rigid. She refused to acknowledge him. Grant drew nearer, setting down his headpiece. When recognition struck, his chest seized. That particular scar, a small curved line adorning her wrist, he himself had bandaged it years before. A small child had nestled behind her father's leg, asking whether it would leave a permanent impression. He'd reassured her, though dishonestly. The handler thrust Lena forward. Grant steadied her before collapse consumed her. Her flesh burned beneath his fingers. For the initial time, their eyes connected, hers the shade of grass, though vacant. "Hollowed, Lena," he uttered. Her countenance stayed unmoved, though something flickered, a buried fragment from before devastation claimed everything. Yet she buried it deeper. Those in circumstances like hers learned quickly that acquaintance with old faces bred danger. Whether her mind had preserved his image remained unclear. Whether she preferred not to, equally uncertain. Beyond those walls, the wind conveyed the rhythmic echo of commerce. One more existence traded. One more spirit vanished. Grant distributed his remaining currency and guided the speechless girl across the threshold. The footpath extended endlessly beneath an unforgiving firmament. Lena maintained distance behind him, her chains producing low musical sounds, each reverberation a weight upon his conscience. Would she comprehend his motivations? Possibly never. Yet as that barn entrance sealed shut, he sensed the past closing in. 8 years prior, his father's avarice had destroyed the Cartwright household. Now, what remained of their lineage walked beside him, wounded, wordless, still breathing. Grant understood the phantoms of that moment would pursue him perpetually until he revealed everything. But how could he seek pardon from someone who didn't recognize his face? Miles accumulated beneath animal hooves. Almost immediately upon departing, Grant drew the horses to a standstill, withdrew a metal implement from his pocket, and freed her from the shackles. "No individual merits these bonds in liberated territory," he murmured, remembering assured liberation pledges from victorious forces. The temperature intensified relentlessly, hardening and fracturing the ground beneath them. His pace remained measured. Behind him, this girl perched atop a smaller horse, equally mute, chin lowered. Besides the periodic jingling of the remaining ankle bracelet, quietness persisted. Her dread radiated like warmth from a furnace. When he glanced rearward, her attention remained fixed earthward, never finding his eyes. They rested beneath a sprawling oak, its canopy offering the solitary sanctuary from the blazing climate for miles around. Grant descended, secured the animals, and extracted a water vessel from his luggage. He approached with caution, maintaining separation between them. "Take this," he offered softly. She remained hesitant, surveying him as though he might lash out. At last, trembling fingers reached forward. She possessed the container with such intensity that her knuckles blanched. The expression of someone who'd encountered counterfeit kindnesses repeatedly since the conflict subsided. Appraising him thoroughly before lowering defenses, she consumed sparingly, moistened her mouth, then examined him directly for the initial moment. Her utterance came quiet, yet possessed the capacity to cleave through bone. "Suppose you've obtained what your money purchased. Take your turn." Grant's entire being froze. His lungs seemed to cease function. The words lacerated worse than any projectile. Gradually, he descended to his haunches, ensuring his palms remained exposed and unthreatening. "My acquisition wasn't about possessing you," he articulated. "I simply refused to witness you disappear into someone else's servitude." She responded with bitter amusement, abbreviated, parched. "Does that absolve everything?" Silence swallowed his answer. None existed that would ring genuine. They inhabited that scorching space, separated by their histories. Grant examined the earth beneath his boots, perspiration mixing with grime across his skin. "I was acquainted with your relations," he proceeded finally. "Your father possessed integrity. I should have intervened when circumstances deteriorated." Lena averted her face. Her intonation flattened. "Everyone expresses regret once it's irreversible." Breeze stirred the foliage overhead. She rose, cradling the container, and relocated toward her mount. Grant refrained from pursuing. He'd justly earned her resentment. Animal footfalls resonated across the countryside, hollow, rhythmic, like an organ attempting to reestablish its cadence. How much terrain would pass before her perception of him shifted, if transformation occurred at all? One persistent contemplation ignited within him. What would she experience upon uncovering his complete history? Twilight was descending when the settlement appeared before them. The surroundings stretched vast and dormant, a terrain where atmospheric currents themselves appeared depleted. Grant loosened the reins, passed Lena fragments of hardened bread, and gestured toward the modest structure awaiting them. "Inside," he simply stated. She hesitated, orbs darting between the solitary cot and the unlit hearth. Subsequently, she ventured inward gradually, warily, reminiscent of a stray creature testing unfamiliar ground. Stillness dominated the ranch for several rotations of the sun. Lena executed duties wordlessly, distributing provisions to livestock, transporting liquid, polishing surfaces until her appendages developed fissures. Grant conducted repairs to boundary markers, mended structural elements, deliberately avoiding her vicinity. They coexisted as spectral entities inhabiting identical space, yet seclusion breeds brevity. On the next sunrise cycle, mounted figures emerged from the lane. Dust manifested initially. Subsequently, illumination bounced off distinctive insignia. Sheriff Dalton, the individual who'd once proclaimed himself an instrument of righteousness. The identical person whose regiment had incinerated the Cartwright residence to cinders. He dismounted gradually, expression twisted into a knowing smirk. "Well, encountered another wandering acquisition, have we, Grant?" His attention drifted beyond Grant, concentrating upon the female positioning herself behind the wooden barrier. He examined the distinctive marking on her inner arm, the very emblem from that destructive evening from nearly a decade previously, and his satisfaction momentarily evaporated. That's a visage I'd resigned myself to never confronting again. Lena's physique went rigid. Her digits practically perforated the railing. Grant inserted himself between them. "You've witnessed sufficient," he announced calmly. Dalton's chuckle expanded. "Accumulating strays now, are you? Keeping her for companionship during lonely nights?" Grant remained composed. Yet something fundamental shifted. That particular silence, the kind preceding gunfire. "I purchased her autonomy," Grant articulated, his cadence remaining controlled and measured. "Not her flesh." Dalton progressed forward methodically. Appendage positioned against the firearm fastened at his waist. "Remarkably generous conduct. Surely, except I retain memory of the Cartwright designation." Her sire represented sedition. The identical fabrication he'd weaponized to authorize. Plundering, labeling honest agriculturalists as Insurrectionists advantageous to Northern, forces merely to commandeer their possessions amid post-war confusion. Lena's breathing became erratic. Her clasp upon the timber intensified, memories surging, the conflagration that evening. Yearning erupted to expose his deceptions, yet knowledge warned that discretion had prolonged her survival in a fractured society. Grant's mandible hardened with determination. She remains beneath my guardianship. Dalton produced a low laugh, thrust his appendage into his garment, and retrieved something. A solitary projectile. He positioned it deliberately upon the split-rail divider between them. "Recollection, Grant," he murmured, his tone deceptively gentle. "Certain wraiths resist remaining interred. When they ultimately departed, their displacement generated an aura heavier than preceding moments." Lena gathered the metallic object, rotating it within her grasp. Who exactly was that individual? She questioned in hushed tones. Grant withheld verbal response. "Not presently," he merely said, gaze directed toward dimming illumination. The phantoms of blazing structures and anguished cries permeated his recollections. He comprehended this wouldn't terminate. When Dalton returned, devastation would accompany him. That evening, atmospheric currents accelerated beyond normality, the variety transporting moisture's essence and nostalgia. Grant occupied himself beside burning timber within their dwelling, dancing firelight creating phantasmagoric images across rough surfaces. Lena positioned herself across from him, equally wordless, her physiognomy obscured by darkness. Neither had articulated anything throughout the time since Dalton's appearance. Yet silence possesses mechanisms for extracting buried truths. Eventually, Lena extracted something from her garment and positioned it upon the shared surface. An antiquated metallic chronometer, its surface displaying considerable deterioration. Initials, R, barely perceptible upon its underside. She propelled it in his direction. "Recognize this?" She posed delicately. Grant's breathing halted mid-cycle. Comprehension arrived like a physical blow. "Robert Cartwright. Her sire. I recovered it subsequent to the incursion. Concealed it for 8 consecutive years," she revealed. "Throughout each successive transaction, each brand-new proprietor, I guaranteed nobody could procure it. My sire entrusted it to me just prior to uniformed soldiers arriving. 'Preserve this, Lena,' he'd murmured. A remnant of kinship the conflict dismantled, mirroring countless additional households throughout these territories." She elevated her vision toward him, her irises displaying both acuity and unshed precipitation. "You recognized him, didn't you?" Grant's respiratory apparatus constricted. His articulation emerged strained. "Genuinely, I did," Lena inclined forward. "Communicate veracity. What transpired that specific evening?" Grant contemplated the burning materials extensively. They expanded, compressed, writhed like incorporeal dancers. At last, utterances emerged, each word bearing gravitas. "My paternal figure bartered yours existence for possession of acreage following the conflict. Eavesdropping intercepted his communication with enforcement personnel. I accelerated a horse to provide forewarning. Arrival proved premature. Combustion consumed everything. I remained inert. I persisted. They perished." Lena maintained her quietness. She recovered the chronometer and enclosed it within her palm. Digits transformed pale as bone, vibrating with the impulse to propel it into consuming fire and obliterate remembrances, yet the past maintained its grasp unrelentingly. Impressions surfaced, periods of existence before devastation, when kinships harbored aspirations for reformed nationhood. "Does articulating this modification circumstances?" She posed. "Negatively," he uttered with hushed intensity. "Yet you merit comprehension of your proximity." Motionlessness pervaded extended intervals. Exterior reverberations grew increasingly violent, atmospheric percussion replicating terrestrial recollection of what they attempted to suppress. Lena commenced vocalizing again, her articulation practically imperceptible. "If your paternal lineage precipitated everything, why do you maintain this accumulated remorse?" Grant's vision ascended, his orbs exhibiting exhaustion yet steadfastness. "Participation constituted my transgression. Passivity represented my transgression. Uninterrupted respiration while others ceased represented my transgression. Burning timber fractured once more. Lena examined him, and instantaneously, her antagonism seemed to diminish, not vanished wholly, merely fractured, like some internal mechanism initiated comprehension. Yet before articulation materialized, external phenomena disrupted concentration, equine locomotion, velocity, proximity. Grant's appendage gravitated toward his weapon, because occasionally, preceding histories don't permit courteous announcement. Equine resonance gradually extinguished into remoteness, leaving exclusively timber combustions crackling. Grant maintained position beside the entrance, weaponry accessible, attention devoted to rainfall descending exterior. Lena rested beside the warmth source, the metallic chronometer maintaining its secure residence within her clasp. Neither vocalized substance, yet atmospheric quality transformed, no longer frigid, no longer hostile, simply burdened by everything verbalized. Illumination materialized. Meteorological disturbance dissipated. The celestial expanse manifested immaculate, delicate luminescence bathing the establishment. Grant proceeded outward to reconstruct fractured fencing, his actions controlled, his musculature testifying to accumulated exertion and accumulated remorse. He nearly overlooked her, absent her intervention. "You're implementing that incorrectly," she articulated, her inflection characteristically aloof, nearly amusement-tinged. He rotated. She transported an instrument, her locks disheveled, her garments persisting in dampness from preceding rainfall. Lacking supplementary discourse, she positioned herself alongside him and commenced contributing. They proceeded in collaboration throughout extended intervals. Vocalization stayed absent. Exclusively acoustic phenomena emerged, substance and environmental conditions, and perplexingly, in that quiet collaboration, transformation initiated. Not adoration, not presently, though something approached tranquility. Subsequent to their admission evening, Grant commenced shaping timber remnants, recognizing Lena warranted commemorative recognition, memorial markers materializing everywhere throughout the Dominion for war casualties. Eventually, he fabricated dual miniature wooden memorials positioned near the boundary line. Individual nomenclature received meticulous inscription, one for Robert Cartwright. The opposite simply designated relations. Upon visualization, Lena's optical organs submerged in liquid she'd suppressed across 8 rotations of seasons. She descended, appendages tracing the carved impressions gently. Subsequently, she positioned herself upright, traversed to him, and restored the chronometer into his possession. "Contemplate this as belonging there," she articulated with gentleness. He declined with a head rotation. It appropriately inhabits with them. A genuine, diminished, fatigued grin emerged. Subsequently, let it persist here. That evening, she abandoned her corner existence. Rather, she positioned herself beside the illuminated aperture, monitoring celestial illumination, while Grant, occupying opposite furniture, ultimately experienced respiratory ease. Rotations transformed into extended intervals. Lena persisted. She mended garments, cultivated botanical specimens, positioned a plank within his appendages when mud consumption nearly toppled him. Insignificant gestures accumulated, reconstructing reliance like populations, regenerating following destruction. Gradually, the spectral inhabitants haunting that establishment diminished. Perhaps absolution doesn't manifest instantaneously. Perhaps it expands as vegetation penetrates destroyed ground. Gradual, gentle, inexorable. Perhaps that constitutes genuine recuperation. If you've previously harbored remorse, insufficiently articulate, what would constitute prerequisite authorization for self-acceptance? If another individual perpetrated damage, might you permit restoration attempts? Accumulate oxygen. Distribute heated leaf infusion. Contemplate this. When this chronicle penetrated something within your interior, provide positive feedback, communicate reflections, and maintain connection to experience approaching developments. Sometimes, inhabiting the harshest territories, humans still navigate homeward.